Good morning. Morning has broken. You can see evidence of all the rain we had. A lot of rain yesterday. You saw the clouds coming in yesterday morning. You can see how the dampness is in the walls. All kinds of puddles over here. There are a couple still left. If there are any German speakers tuned in, remember the poem of Reinhard May. In die Pfützen schwimmt Benzin, schimmernd wie ein Regenbogen. In the puddles, gasoline is swimming, shimmernd. How do I say that in English? And it's like a rainbow in the puddle. I need to turn off the lights over here. So we have a new set of readings for this week. The first readings from the book of Maccabees. And the book of Maccabees in a way stands for a theme that's very dear to our hearts in our times: religious freedom. It's amazing how great the temptation is for people to override the freedom of others. Also people of faith. For differing convictions, differing motivations. I'm just going to turn off the lights inside here, so give me a second. So some people try to overpower others because of power. And want to have them as slaves, economically, politically. And then people of religion can also do it because maybe the motive is a little higher and worthier. They say, we know what is true, and we don't want you to be in error. We know what is true and we don't want you to be in error. And so there's a temptation to impose that truth that's perceived on others. But what we find with God himself in his dealings with us, as we see throughout Revelation, God doesn't impose. And maybe there are some expressions of this type of language, because the scriptures are both inspired by God but written by human beings. And they're written with the mindset of the human beings, and God is breaking through that mindset gradually, like this light is breaking through the clouds and transforming, enlightening. And so it takes time for human beings. And we see both things happening in the book of the Maccabees. We see the persecution of people by the Greeks, the Hellenists, but we also see the Maccabees themselves taking into their own hands the punishment of those community members, fellow Jewish people, who renege their faith and go with the public, politically correct process. And so they also impose their viewpoint. And this cannot be taken as a norm for life, because we see in the overall picture how God actually respects the human being and every single one. And he respected and still gave life to Cain, who killed Abel. Hey, there's a new Grand Canyon that was just formed. Can I show you? And here we can see the forces of nature working, although this Grand Canyon is miniature, but it came because of the heavy rains just yesterday. Isn't that amazing? This wasn't here 2 days ago. So we've got a Grand Canyon here. First of all, we have the gathering of all the waters coming down here, obviously through this low spot. Let me see if so this drops here. So then all this area is a catchment area of water. And actually, why there's no grass here is because all of this area is covered by a fabric, and then the gravel is put on top of that. So that prevents the water immediately getting down through it. It's a porous cover, but it obviously impedes the immediate flow away of the water. So then this all got washed away yesterday by the heavy streams coming from the rain. Look at the power of this, what it did. So you can imagine gathering here. So look at this Grand Canyon. It's about a foot deep, and all that. It's actually a lot of shells. That's interesting to watch what's underneath there, isn't it? Look at the way this is. Just to give you an idea of the depth, I can go down here. It's about elbow deep, almost. And you can see the layers of sand and shells. And then you see the heavier stones then that the water didn't carry away. And then it all got spread out over here. Interesting how nature works. And the power of water against solids. And maybe that's a good example as well of how, you know, ideas seem weak in front of the sword. The sword imposes, like the Hellenists coming with their sword against the Maccabees, or the very Maccabees coming with their sword against their fellow Jews who weren't towing the line. And every organization also needs order. And so there are punishments for not going along with the consensus. The question is then if that consensus honors the human being and the rights of the human being. Any business, a supermarket has a way of doing things, and the employees should follow that methodology, otherwise the operation can't function. And there's a punishment if they don't, or they'll be fired. but there are things that doesn't affect the human dignity. But maybe one day then the supermarket says we're going to sell pornographic magazines, and some employees say, well, we don't like that. Hey guys, look at how green the Mount Arbel is getting already from last week's rains. And imagine after all the rain yesterday, we can expect a very green Mount Arbel very soon. So then when the heavy-duty sword comes in with its steel edge and even claims martyrs for the oppressed group, the idea of that the seemingly weak ones physically represent sometimes can overpower the sword. And we have that amazing proverb in Christianity, the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians. It was coined by, I think, by Origen back in the 3rd century, because they already had seen that the more the Christians were persecuted, Boker Tov, the more they were persecuted, the community thrived. It was an amazing realization. My shoes aren't ready to go over there now because I don't want to cake up on any dirt, so I'll stay here this morning. I think all the vegetation up in Mount Arbel is singing this morning after so much rain. And then the religious people have to learn that, okay, we are convinced we have truth. And obviously there are different religious outlooks, but just let's take it as a phenomenon in general. And there again, force should not be employed. Yet parents have the right to teach their children the faith. And their right is primary and precedes the government. Again, there are also some limits in the sense that if people have some strange religious idea that they can do physically damage their children, then obviously there's a consensus that that's wrong. To protect the good of the child physically and socially and so forth. There can be a lot of argument about certain things in that regard. So it's an area of debate and of reason. And some regimes, totalitarian regimes, are very severe in their punishment. And so the acquisition of the place of religious freedom and a culture of religious freedom is still quite an issue for humanity. And even in Western democracies, sometimes there can be great infringements of religious liberty. And that's an extraordinary dignity that's granted the human person by our Creator. And even to respect the person when they're in error. I cannot oppress them or oblige them by force. We can talk, we can discuss, we can debate, we can appeal to reason, but we can't physically impose faith and belief. And it's interesting to watch the process in the reading today about the effort and how the human being resists that imposition. But it's so easy then for even victims to themselves impose, just like we have that story in the Gospels on a different subject, a different matter of forgiving debt. And the person who was forgiven a large debt went and really applied brutal force, even physical force, against a fellow worker who owed him just a little bit. So the culture of freedom is also a two-way street, and that's the great talent of good parenting, how to transmit great convictions to their children, great faith convictions, but to do it with great respect to develop the individual, the person, the personal qualities of their children, that they will assimilate the religious truth as a personal conviction and not just as a force of habit. And we have discovered very evidently that when religious faith is practiced by social pressure, social pressure doesn't have to be persecution in the sense of physical punishments for infringement of faith practice and belief, but simply going with the crowd and everybody does it. When I was a child, like all of the community practiced, basically. There were very, very few exceptions, and all were Catholic. But if people do it just because everybody is doing it and haven't grown into the deep reasons for the faith and haven't developed that personally, little by little from childhood, then when the masses stop practicing, then those who haven't internalized, personalized their faith are. And it's interesting also that in the miracle today in the gospel, it's a little bit like the same principle is applied in another aspect. There are people trying to hush somebody who is trying to call out to Jesus, and they say, you shouldn't be bothering him. But this guy's very persistent. He's a strong will, and he's an interior urge to call on Jesus to help him. And then Jesus calls for him. But Jesus also doesn't impose on him. On the contrary, he draws him out more and he says, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? And there we have also a great call to the man's own convictions. I want to be healed of my blindness. I want it. We have the Roman centurion in Capernaum who goes to Jesus and said, Jesus, cure my servant. He's very sick. But this man is coming and saying, I want to be healed. What a great prayer. Lord, heal me from my blindness. And maybe we all have a little bit of it. And we need to be healed of our blindness. Good people, let's leave it like that for today. And let's pray for each other. Let's pray for peace here in the Holy Land. Continue praying. And all around the world where everybody else also has their troubles. God bless you. See you later, alligator.